I remember the crack in Daniel's voice more than the words themselves, the way they slipped out of me, like I wanted him to bleed for the truth I was too scared to face. The night rain hammered the window, and in its rhythm I heard the sentence that ruined us replaying like a curse. "You're not a now." Even now, I can taste the instant regret, metallic and sharp, like biting my own tongue just to stop myself from begging him to stay. He didn't shout. He just stared, eyes wide, as if I had confirmed the fear he tried so hard to bury. And in that silence, I saw everything slipping. His hands, his trust, the warmth we built. I didn't know then that the person I shoved away would become the person everyone else desired, the version of him I would crave. Too late. The last thing he said before the door slammed was a whisper that freezes me awake at night. "What truth are you hiding from yourself, Mia?" And right as he stepped into the hallway, he turned back. Expression unreadable, like he already knew I'd come crawling back someday. But something in his eyes said he wouldn't be waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the moment his face collapsed, the way his eyes lost that worn shine he always gave me, even when we argued. Morning made everything worse. The sun felt too honest, the walls too bare, the silence too sharp. I walked through the apartment touching objects he had touched, as if they might still carry some warmth from him. My mind kept circling the same question he asked before leaving. "What truth are you hiding from yourself, Mia?" I knew exactly what he meant. I'd been pushing him away for months, terrified of needing him too much, terrified of wanting someone else too, terrified of wanting more than one truth at once. And instead of confessing that confusion, I weaponized it. I told myself he'd come back after cooling down, but the phone stayed silent. And in that silence, I felt the beginning of a consequence I couldn't take back. By afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old messages, rereading every soft word Daniel ever sent me. I kept landing on the photos we took on the coast trip, the ones where his arms wrapped around me from behind, and I looked so effortlessly safe. I realized how carelessly I had treated that safety, how ordinary I'd assumed it was. Love wasn't supposed to feel fragile, yet ours always had, like glass warmed by the sun. Beautiful, but waiting for one wrong touch to shatter. I whispered his name into the empty room just to hear how it sounded without him. It echoed back hollow, unfamiliar. Part of me wanted to run to his place, apologize, crawl into his arms and promise I'd never use my fear as a weapon again. But another part of me knew I needed to understand why I said the most unforgivable thing to the person I needed most. And that truth scared me more than losing him. As evening settled, I finally stepped outside for air. But the world felt painfully normal. Cars passing, neighbors laughing, the sky turning a soft, bruised pink. It felt wrong that everything else kept moving. I walked without direction, letting my feet take me past the Café Daniel, and I used to visit. The tables were filled with strangers. Yet in the corner I could almost imagine him, 31, leaning back with that teasing half-smile he saved just for me. The phantom made my chest ache. I wondered if he was out somewhere now, breaking down the way I was, or if he'd already begun building walls I would never be allowed to climb again. I kept hearing my own voice, "You're not enough," and each repetition cracked something deeper. I knew I had changed the story of us, maybe permanently, but I also felt the beginning of something else. The fear that he might become someone stronger without me. By nightfall, I ended up back home, exhausted but unable to sit still. I wandered into the kitchen where we once danced barefoot at midnight, where he'd hold me from behind and hum into my neck. The counter felt colder now. I pressed my forehead against the cabinet, trying to breathe through the guilt pressing against my ribs. I didn't know if I deserved forgiveness. I didn't even know if forgiveness mattered when the damage was already done. What scared me most was the realization settling painfully in my chest. Daniel wasn't the problem. I was. My fear, my desire, my confusion about wanting more than one kind of love. Everything I buried burst out in one cruel sentence. And now, I wasn't sure if I'd lost him temporarily or forever. The next morning, the guilt sat in my stomach like a stone I couldn't digest. I kept pacing the apartment, waiting for some sign from Daniel that never came. I thought about calling, but my fingers hovered uselessly over his name. Instead, I found myself drifting into memories, ones I didn't expect, ones I tried to bury. Memories of Alex. His laughter, his warmth, the way he used to look at me like he could see every contradiction inside me and still didn't flinch. I hated that the confusion wasn't gone. I hated that my fear of wanting more than one person still had teeth. Daniel once asked me if there was someone else tugging at the edges of my heart, and I lied. Now that lie felt louder than the truth. I wasn't unfaithful, but I felt emotionally crooked, bent in directions I refused to admit existed. And it made losing Daniel feel like punishment I had written for myself long ago. By afternoon, I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I walked to the small park near our old place, where Daniel and I once spent lazy evenings stretched on the grass, planning futures we thought we understood. I sat beneath the same old oak tree, feeling the weight of its shadow settle over me like judgment. I remembered how Daniel once cupped my face here and asked if I felt fully chosen with him. I told him yes, but in truth, I felt split down the middle, half terrified of needing him completely, half terrified that my heart wasn't built for the kind of love he thought was the only way to love someone. I wondered if things would have been different had I told him the truth sooner, before fear twisted into cruelty. The breeze moved softly through the leaves, and for a moment I pretended it was his fingertips brushing my cheek, forgiving me. But the ache stayed. I hadn't seen Alex in almost a year, but that evening, I found myself standing outside the bar he worked at. I told myself I was just walking, but my feet seemed to know exactly where to go. The neon glow spilled onto the sidewalk, and with it came memories of the gentle tension that once existed between us. The way he listened to me, the warm way he said my name. I wasn't here for him, not really. I was here because part of me wanted clarity, wanted to know if the feelings I hid were real, or just fear disguised as longing. I didn't go inside, I just watched through the window. Alex moved confidently behind the counter, his smile easy, his shoulders relaxed. A version of me, braver, truer, might have walked in, told him everything. But I wasn't her, not yet. I turned away before he saw me, heart pounding as though I'd done something forbidden. When I got home, the apartment felt colder than ever. I turned on the lights, but the brightness only made everything look emptier. I sat on the couch and hugged my knees to my chest, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. I kept thinking about Daniel's last look, the way it held more sadness than anger. He didn't deserve what I said. He didn't deserve to carry the weight of a truth I was too afraid to speak. I wondered if he was with someone right now, telling them the story of the girl who broke him because she couldn't face herself. The thought crushed me. Part of loving someone is trusting them with your darkest parts. But I handed Daniel a mask instead and expected him to read through it. And when he couldn't, I punished him. I pressed my face into my knees and let myself break in a way I never allowed before. Late that night, my phone buzzed. My heart leapt, but it wasn't Daniel. It was a message from an unknown number. Mia, it's Alex. I think we need to talk. My breath caught. I hadn't given him my new number. Somehow that made it feel even more fated. I stared at the message, 1,000 emotions crashing into each other. Why now? Why the exact night I was drowning in regret? Was this a sign or a test? I didn't know if I was ready to open old doors, especially when the one I truly wanted felt like it was closing. But a truth sat heavy in my chest. Part of the chaos inside me began with Alex, with the feelings I never faced, with the version of myself I never allowed to speak. And maybe it was time. My thumb hovered over the screen as I whispered into the dark. I'm so afraid of. I didn't have the answer. Not yet. I didn't reply to Alex right away. I just stared at his message until the words blurred, my breath thick in my throat. It felt like the universe was opening a door I had slammed, shut out of fear. I finally typed, "We can talk." As soon as I sent it, regret and anticipation tangled inside me like barbed wire. What would I even say? That he was the first person who made me question whether love could be bigger than one heart could hold. That he saw something in me Daniel never recognized. Something I was too afraid to admit even existed. I paced my living room, feeling guilt twist deeper. Because the more I thought about Alex, the more I realized he wasn't a distraction from Daniel. He was a truth I had buried to protect the version of myself Daniel needed me to be. And now, facing him again, felt like facing the mirror I had avoided for too long. I wasn't sure which terrified me more, what Alex might say, or what I might feel. Alex chose a quiet cafe for the next morning, one I hadn't visited in years. Walking there felt like stepping into a memory that still smelled warm and bittersweet. When I saw him waiting by the window, something in my chest tightened. Recognition mixed with unfinished business. He stood when he saw me, eyes soft, expression unreadable. We sat, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was charged. Finally he asked, "Why did you disappear, Mia?" His voice was low, not accusing, just wounded. I told him the truth, or at least a part of it. That I pulled away because I felt something I wasn't ready for. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. His jaw clenched, but not in anger, more like understanding. "You loved him," he said. And I did, but there was a hesitation in me he had always sensed. And now, sitting across from him, that old flicker of longing returned, subtle but unmistakable. Our conversation drifted toward the past, the almosts, the nearless, the nights we lingered too long in each other's orbit. Alex spoke honestly, saying he stepped back because he sensed I wasn't free, not emotionally, not in the ways that mattered. I admitted he was right. I told him how my fear of wanting him and Daniel at the same time made me run. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with something like recognition. "You don't have to choose one truth," he said. The words hit me harder than I expected. I wondered if Daniel would ever understand that part of me, the part that didn't love in straight lines. I felt tears gather, not out of romance but relief. Finally hearing the thing I'd been terrified to say out loud. But then Alex asked the question I feared most. If Daniel came back right now, where would that leave me? I had no answer, and the silence that followed was sharper than any lie. After leaving the cafe, I wandered the streets in a haze, the conversation replaying in loops. Alex had awakened a truth I'd to suffocate, but the moment I reached the corner near Daniel's old building, everything inside me twisted. I wanted to run to him, to plead, to explain that my feelings weren't a betrayal. They were just complicated, layered, real. But I also knew showing up uninvited could push him further away. I stood across from his front door, staring at the entrance like it was a doorway to a life I might have lost forever. I imagined him inside, maybe packing, maybe healing, maybe learning to let go. The worst possibility was that he wasn't thinking about me at all. I placed a hand on the cold brick wall and whispered his name as if the wind would carry it to him. Loving him felt like holding something breakable I'd already dropped. I went home drained, my mind too loud to think clearly. I curled up on the couch and stared at the ceiling, trying to unravel the knots inside me. I felt pulled in two directions, not toward two men, but toward two versions of myself. The Mia who wanted Daniel was safe, loyal, careful. The Mia who felt drawn to Alex was curious, brave, unfiltered. And the truth was, I wasn't fully either of them. I was both. And neither man had ever seen that whole version of me because I had never shown her. My phone buzzed suddenly. This time, it was Daniel. A single message: "We need to talk." My pulse exploded in my ears. The words felt like a second chance and a warning in the same breath. I whispered to myself, what moment broke us beyond repair? I wasn't sure, but something told me the next conversation might reveal the real answer. When Daniel texted me, it felt like the air shifted, like the world held its breath. I reread his message a dozen times, searching for clues in the 5 quiet words. We need to talk. They didn't sound angry. They didn't sound forgiving either. They sounded final. I sat on the couch trying to picture his face. Would he look guarded? Broken? Indifferent? My stomach twisted with a fear I couldn't disguise anymore. I wanted him back, but I didn't want to lie to myself again. I didn't want to pretend I was someone simple, someone who felt only one thing at a time. I typed, "When?" My hands shook until he replied, "Tonight." I stared at the clock as hours crawled by. I kept thinking about Alex, about Daniel, about the pieces of myself that didn't fit neatly into anyone's expectations. I wasn't sure if this conversation would save us or bury us, but I knew I couldn't run from it anymore. As the time approached, I changed outfits 3 times before realizing nothing I wore would fix what I'd broken. I finally settled on something simple, something familiar. Clothes Daniel had seen me in 100 times. I wanted him to see the version of me he knew, even if that version had shattered. When I reached the cafe he chose, I spotted him immediately. He looked different, not physically, still tall, lean, pale-skinned, blonde hair, slightly messy. But there was a new stillness in him, a maturity sharpened by hurt. He didn't smile when he saw me. He didn't look away either. We sat across from each other, and the silence felt heavier than any argument we ever had. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Mia, why did you say that?" I swallowed hard, realizing that tonight wasn't about excuses. It was about the truth I'd never dared to speak aloud. I told him everything, slowly, carefully, terrified of the cracks in my own voice. I admitted, I said, "You're not enough," because I was scared of losing him, scared of needing him too much, scared of wanting someone else as well, and not knowing what that meant about me. His face tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I told him how confused I was, how guilty, how torn between 2 different versions of myself. When I mentioned Alex, his jaw clenched, but not with jealousy, more like realization. "So you pushed me away before I could leave," he said quietly. His words sliced through me because they were true. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. Daniel leaned back, staring at the table as if weighing the entire history of us. "I loved you so hard, Mia," he whispered. I didn't know I was fighting shadows the whole time. I blinked, heart collapsing under the weight of what he'd finally understood. After a long silence, Daniel asked the question that shattered something inside me. "Do you love him?" I stared at him, stunned. Not because he asked, but because for the first time he wasn't angry. He was simply trying to understand. I told him I didn't know, that my feelings for Alex weren't about choosing him over Daniel, but about a part of myself I never explored. Daniel's eyes softened with a sadness I'll never forget. "I couldn't have loved all of you," he said, "if you had just let me see you." I felt my breath catch. We were so close, almost touching, almost breaking, almost healing. He reached out, but his hand stopped midway, hesitating as if touching me might reopen wounds he wasn't ready to feel again. The truth settled between us like a fragile confession. We were both trying, but trying might no longer be enough. When we finally stepped outside, the night air felt too cold, too honest. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets, staring at the ground as though searching for a way to rewrite us. I wanted to reach for him, to fix everything, but I knew I couldn't offer him the simplicity he once wanted. "I still love you," I whispered. He looked up slowly, his eyes soft with truth, not hope. "No," he said, "but love isn't the problem." His voice cracked, and for a moment he looked like the man I broke. The night told him he wasn't enough. "You need to understand yourself before you ask anyone to hold you," he continued. "Even me." His words weren't punishment, they were mercy, and somehow that hurt more. As he walked away, not angry, not broken, just accepting, I realized something devastating. Daniel was becoming the version of himself I always feared, strong enough to live without. I didn't go home right away. I wandered through the quiet streets, Daniel's words echoing in every corner of my mind. "You need to understand yourself before you ask anyone to hold you." They weren't meant to hurt, but they cracked something open inside me. I realized I had spent years living in fragments. One, self for Daniel. Another hidden away, afraid of its own hunger. I stopped at a bench near the river, watching the lights shimmer across the dark water. A part of me wished Daniel had begged me to stay, even though I knew that would have been unfair. Another part of me felt a tiny spark of relief, like maybe his strength was permission for me to finally face what I'd been running from. I thought of Alex, of the message waiting on my phone, of the unresolved pull I never dared to hold still long enough to understand. For the first time, I wondered if this was less about choosing between them and more about choosing myself. The next morning, sunlight dragged me back into reality. I stared at my reflection. Messy hair, puffy eyes. A woman unraveling and rebuilding all at once. I finally opened my message with Alex. My fingers hovered before typing, "Can we meet tonight?" His response came almost instantly. "Yes, anytime." Something inside me tightened, not with romance but with truth. An overdue truth I'd avoided because I didn't trust myself with it. I spent the day in a fog, moving through tasks without meaning. I kept thinking about Daniel leaving with quiet grace, and about Alex waiting for answers I didn't fully have yet. My heart felt like two doors opening at the same time, and I was terrified of standing in the doorway. Still, I knew I had to face Alex honestly without hiding behind fear or guilt. Tonight wasn't about choosing him. It was about confronting the part of me I had buried under shame. I met Alex at a quiet rooftop bar as the sun dipped behind the skyline. When he saw me, something softened in his expression. Like a weight he'd carried for too long finally loosened. We sat by the railing, the breeze cool against my skin. Alex didn't rush me. He just waited, eyes steady, giving me the space I never gave myself. I told him everything. My fear, my guilt, my confusion about wanting more than one connection at once, and how it made me feel like I was broken or incapable of real love. He listened without flinching. "You're not broken," he said gently. "You just feel deeply. You love deeply. And you keep trying to cram that into a box that isn't built for you." His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, someone wasn't telling me to choose. Someone was telling me to understand. But beneath that comfort, a quiet ache stirred, because I still didn't know if I could give him what he hoped for. When I finished speaking, Alex took a slow breath, leaning back against the railing. "I cared about you," he said softly. "But I didn't want to be your escape from something you didn't understand yet." His honesty was a mirror I couldn't hide from. I looked at him, the man who once made my heart race and my mind question everything, and realized the pull I felt wasn't about choosing him. It was about choosing freedom. Choosing honesty. Choosing the parts of myself I had muted for so long. "I don't want to use you," I whispered. Alex nodded. Fendant. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't demand clarity or promises. He simply wanted me to be real. And in that moment, I saw the truth. He wasn't the man I needed to chase. He was the man who helped me see myself. The ache in my chest loosened, replaced by a quiet understanding I hadn't expected. We walked out together, but the space between us felt peaceful rather than tense. At the street corner, Alex stopped and faced me. "You don't owe me a future," he said gently. "Just honesty." His kindness nearly broke me. For the first time, I understood that the chaos inside me wasn't something to punish. It was something to explore with care. "Thank you," I whispered, meaning it more deeply than anything I'd said in months. He smiled, soft and sincere, then stepped back. "Find yourself, Mia, then decide what love means to you." As he walked away, I realized the ache I felt wasn't loss. It was release. The streets felt different afterward, lighter somehow. I didn't know where things stood with Daniel, or if they stood at all. But I knew this. The next step wasn't about choosing a man. It was about choosing the truth I had buried for years. And for the first time, I felt ready. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, like someone had taken a vacuum to my chest and left only echoes behind. Alex's words from last night replayed softly, almost like a lullaby meant to steady me. "Find yourself, then decide what love means to you." I kept thinking about Daniel too, about the quiet strength he carried as he walked away. Two different men, two different truths, both forcing me to face the part of me I kept pretending didn't exist. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling every choice I'd made pressing down on. I didn't want to keep hurting people because I was afraid of my own heart. Or my mind kept drifting to the possibility that maybe I didn't break because of Daniel or Alex. Maybe I broke because I kept trying to shrink into versions of myself that were easier to love. I took a slow breath, deciding that today I would stop running and start listening to the parts of me I always drowned out. I spent the afternoon journaling, a habit I abandoned years ago because I was terrified of what the pages might reveal. But today, the words poured out like confessions I'd been choking on. I wrote about Daniel, about the way he loved me with a certainty I mistook for control. I wrote about Alex, about how he saw the versions of me I kept locked away. I wrote about myself, about the way I ran from anything that made me feel too deeply, too intensely. As the pages filled, something inside me loosened. I realized I wasn't caught between two men. I was caught between the fear of being misunderstood and the fear of being fully seen. I pressed my pen harder into the paper, letting the truth spill out. I didn't want to choose just one version of love. I wanted space to grow into the parts of myself I had abandoned. For the first time, that didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a beginning. By evening, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Daniel deserved to know the truth. Not the polished version I used to protect myself, but the messy, unfiltered one I had buried under guilt. I didn't want him back under a lie. I wanted him to see me, truly, even if it meant losing him for good. I walked to his building, rehearsing what I'd say, but every step closer made my throat tighten. When I reached his door, I hesitated, hand hovering over the wood. What if he didn't open? What if he did? I knocked. The pause felt endless before the door finally opened. Daniel stood there, hair a little messy, pale skin touched by warm interior light, eyes tired, but steady. For a second, we just stared at each other, our silence heavy with everything left unsaid. He said softly, and in that moment I knew this was the beginning of a truth we both needed. No matter how it ended, Daniel let me inside without a word. Everything in his apartment felt familiar yet changed. The plants thriving, the air cleaner, the space somehow steadier. It hit me then. He was healing. He offered tea, and we sat across from each other like two people trying to rediscover a language they once spoke fluently. I told him everything. About Alex, about my fears, about the parts of me I hid even from myself. My voice shook, But Daniel listened with heartbreaking patience. "I never wanted you to be someone else," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to hold what you were afraid to show." I felt tears sting my eyes. He wasn't blaming me. He wasn't excusing me. He was simply understanding. "Do you still love me?" he asked eventually. His tone held no expectation, just truth-seeking. And I answered honestly, "But I need to learn to love myself without hurting the people who love me." Daniel didn't respond right away. He just breathed slowly, eyes drifting toward the window as if searching for an answer somewhere beyond us. "Mia," he finally said, voice low, "I will always care about you, but I don't know if we can go back to who we were." His words didn't shock me. They grounded me. I nodded, tears warm on my cheeks. "I'm not asking to go back," I whispered. "I just don't want to leave things broken." Daniel reached out then, gently taking my hand. His touch was steady, familiar, but not possessive. "We're not broken," he said. "We're just different now." I felt something inside me loosen. A breath I'd been holding for months, finally escaping. We sat like that, hand in hand, not lovers, not strangers, but two people who finally understood each other. When I left his apartment, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not certain, but honest. And for the first time, that was enough. I walked home from Daniel's place feeling like the world had shifted by barely an inch, but somehow, that inch made room for an entirely new version of me. The night air felt softer, cooler, almost forgiving. I kept replaying his words. "We're just different now." They didn't sting the way I feared. They anchored me. For so long, I believed relationships had to end in either collapse or reunion. But Daniel had shown me a third path. One where truth didn't destroy, it reshaped. I took a long, slow breath, letting the quiet of the night settle into my chest. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of myself. I wasn't afraid of loving more than one person. I wasn't afraid of wanting connection without possession. I realized I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I was looking for clarity. And what surprised me most was discovering I already had it. I was unfinished, yes, but not broken. The next morning, I made myself coffee without feeling that familiar ache, the one that clung to every routine Daniel once touched. Instead, I felt something lighter. A cautious but real sense of peace. I sat on my balcony, letting the early sun warm my skin, and opened my journal to a fresh page. The words came easily this time. I wrote about Daniel's kindness, Alex's clarity, and the way both men reflected parts of me I had ignored. I wrote about the messy, layered truth of my heart, the one I'd been trying to shrink into a single answer for years. As I scribbled, I felt a quiet realization settle. Love didn't have to fit inside the lines someone else drew. It didn't have to be neat or exclusive or simple. It just had to be honest. And honesty, I finally understood, was something I owed myself before I owed it to anyone else. By afternoon, I felt ready to close the chapter with Alex too. Not with silence or confusion, but with honesty. I texted him, asking if we could talk one more time. We met at the same rooftop bar where everything finally made sense. When he saw me, he smiled, warm and open, but without expectation. I told him how grateful I was for his patience, for his truth, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. I told him I wasn't ready for anything beyond clarity, that I needed time to rebuild who I was without bending for anyone. Alex nodded, his gaze steady. "I want you to be whole," he said softly. "Not for him, not for Daniel, for me." There was no sadness between us, only understanding. When we hugged goodbye, it felt like releasing a breath I had held too tightly for too long. It was closure, but the kind that opens more than it ends. Later that evening, I walked home alone, but for once the solitude didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a door opening. I noticed small things I used to ignore. The hum of street lights, the distant laughter from passing strangers, the way the night breeze wrapped around my skin like a calm promise. I wasn't thinking about Daniel or Alex. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about who I was becoming. The kind of person who didn't run from desire or shame or complexity. The kind of person who could hold more than one truth without letting it tear her apart. I realized the journey wasn't about choosing a person. It was about choosing a path where love could expand instead of shrink. I whispered to myself, "You're enough," letting the words settle where old wounds once lived. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. I ended the night on my balcony again, watching the city lights flicker like distant heartbeats. Everything felt both quiet and alive, a perfect reflection of the person I was becoming. I thought about the beginning, about the night I told Daniel he wasn't enough, when the truth was that I didn't believe I was enough. I carried that fear into everything, molding myself into shapes that fit other people's definitions of love. But now, standing under the open night sky, I understood something I had spent years avoiding. I wasn't meant to fit into one shape. My heart wasn't a box with strict edges. It was a landscape, shifting, layered, alive. Daniel taught me depth. Alex taught me possibility. And now I was teaching myself truth. I closed my eyes, breathed in the cold air, and whispered the words that finally felt real. I'm not broken. I'm becoming. And this time, there was no fear, only freedom.